It's bringing more on whether the public ought to be wearing face masks after the Scottish Government said it would be recommending that cloth face coverings be worn in shops and on public transport in certain circumstances. We're joined by the Labour MP, James Murray, who's a member of the Health and Social Care Committee. James Murray, welcome to you, and thanks for your patience. I know the technology's been struggling a little bit this afternoon, hasn't it? We were talking yesterday to Dr. Brian McCloskey, who's a former Director of Global Health at Public Health England. I put it to him very directly that the consensus seemed to be shifting, the sands were shifting a bit on the wearing of face coverings, and that more people were coming around to the idea. He flatly rejected that and said that there were real problems with face masks and coverings, that they actually sometimes encourage risky behaviours. This is an equivocal area still.
I think the evidence on this is fast moving, and new approaches are coming out day by day, as we're seeing in different countries around the world and different parts of the UK. I think what we need from the government on this for the UK as a whole is clarity, though. The government needs to be very clear.
The scientists, we've been asking this question for weeks from the beginning. And, you know, that's the point. I mean, we're learning, aren't we, that epidemiology is more akin, say, to economics than physics, and that definitive judgments are for the birds. You've got to hedge your bets. You can't be sure.
You're absolutely right that a lot of the decisions around this are taken in the balance and by looking at different bits of evidence. But that is what the government is for. You know, the government is there to look at all of the evidence, to get the very best evidence it can find and come up with the best recommendation they can to keep us healthy. And our job as an opposition is to push the government to make those decisions, to make them public, and crucially to put in the public domain the information on which they've made those decisions so that we can challenge them robustly and be certain that they have taken into account all the evidence they should be in recommending what the public should do.
Yeah, I mean, let's just sort of pin it down a little bit. I mean, a couple of points, really. Hilary Benn, a couple of weeks ago in the House of Commons, wondered if face coverings or face masks were to be introduced more generally for the public, who would pay for it? Poorer people may struggle to access actual... I think at that point the debate was more about masks than face coverings. But there is, I suppose, a question about provision if we end up saying to people, wear a mask.
I think there's been huge problems with provision of protective equipment across the board, as we've seen. You know, the situation for NHS frontline workers and for care workers is an absolute scandal. They can't get access to all the PPE, all the protective equipment that they need. I think some of the debate around some of the face coverings, as it's being reported over the last few days, certainly has moved on to talking about face coverings rather than protective masks. And from my understanding, the recommendation from Scotland today is that it should be protective coverings rather than the face masks, which should obviously go to the frontline healthcare and social care professionals and other key workers first. And, you know, I think today is, International Workers' Memorial Day, and it's a day when we remember workers across the board who died at work. And I think at the front of all of our minds today, at 11 o'clock in the minute silence, you know, was people in the NHS and care sector and all other professions who've been impacted by COVID-19. So I think the face masks, protective equipment generally, but we need to make sure that everyone on the front line has them. If we're talking about protection for people more widely, I think the debate has moved on to protective coverings rather than formal face masks, as it were. But that is where the government needs to give a clear steer on to give us advice on what we should be doing.
Well, James, what's the opposition's position on whether at any stage in the future this ought to become mandatory? Nicola Sturgeon was asked about this today. She was said, could it become mandatory? Could it be enforced by the police? You know, you're not wearing a face mask, put it on or you're going to fine. She said, quote, we will be keeping that under review. We know that in shops in Germany it's mandatory. We've been reporting in the past hour that in France, secondary school pupils will have to wear some kind of face covering when they're in class. What's Labour's position?
I think Labour's position is in line with what Nicola Sturgeon said, which is to keep things under review. You know, the evidence is changing. The evidence is changing fast on this, and I think it's really important to be clear that the government are the ones who need to take a decision about this and to give clear advice to the public about what we should be doing. The government should make those decisions, clearly communicate them, and publish the evidence on which they have taken those decisions. Our job as the opposition is to challenge the government to make decisions, to see the evidence, to make sure that they've made the right decisions for the general public. But it's the government's role to make sure that they are taking those decisions and doing it on the best possible evidence available.
James Murray, very good to talk to you. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.